Here are my 5 favorite features of the new version of Premiere Pro. Number 1 is the ability to stabilize your footage with AI. Now before we had to use warp stabilizer. That worked okay, but it wasn't perfect, and then there was a plugin called Twixtor that worked really well, but it cost money. Well, now you can go up to your video and click Stabilize Motion, and Premiere will do the rest. It's kind of amazing. One thing I found is that it works best if you turn off the track motion for your shot. If you don't, then the results aren't as good. Also, if you're dealing with a lot of shaking, it works best if you break up your clip and only run it on a section at a time. Overall, the results are really impressive. No, 2 is text-based editing. Finally, you can pull text out of your video with ease. All you have to do is type in a word or phrase, and it highlights that part of your video. You can even select the speaker, and it will highlight all of their dialogue. Or you can select the music, and it will highlight all of the parts where the music is playing. Then you can trim that down and move around parts of your video without having to see it. Really handy for picking out sound bites for social media or putting together a montage of sorts. This is so cool. My third favorite feature is the new Lumetric panel. It's much easier to get to your color controls, and they're much easier to understand. The old way, if you were new to color correction, was very confusing. You weren't sure which panel to go to make your adjustment. Well, now everything is in one spot, and it's so much easier. I still think that DaVinci Resolve has better color tools, but these are pretty great. Also, they finally brought back the white balance controls to the Lumetric panel. Before we had to go to our effects panel, and it was just very inconvenient. So thank you, Adobe. Number 4 is that you can now add frames to the beginning or end of your clips with ease. Simply select your clip and go to Generate Frame, and then either pick Extrapolate or use AI to extend your clip. The new AI option does a pretty decent job. It doesn't always make sense, but when it does work, it's pretty cool. This will come in handy when you need to fill in some of the black bars on the top and bottom of your frame. Instead of stretching out your clip and distorting the faces, you can simply generate some new frames with AI, and nobody will ever know. And my 5th favorite feature is the ability to speed up your audio and video at the same time. When you go to Speed Duration, you now have the option to use retiming. If you choose this, it won't distort the voices. If you've ever sped up a video with this feature before, you know that it sounds really weird because it doesn't change the pitch of the audio, but this time it does, which is pretty cool. Now we went over some of the most useful new features, but what about everything else? Well, let's dive into a full comparison of Premiere Pro 2022 versus 2024. First of all, let's talk about performance. In general, Premiere Pro 2022 wasn't necessarily slow, but it did leave something to be desired in terms of speed. It was kind of laggy at times and would crash every once in a while. However, I'm happy to say that the new version of Premiere Pro seems to be much faster, especially on Intel cards. Rumor has it that it's 5 times faster, but I haven't tested that. However, I can tell you that it feels much faster. My only complaint is that it's more taxing on your card, so it eats up more of your GPU memory. However, that seems to be fixed if you use the studio drivers instead of GeForce Experience. Just make sure to install them both. Next, let's talk about format support. The good news is that both versions of Premiere Pro support the major video formats like Red RAW and Blackmagic RAW. However, the new version of Premiere Pro supports some new formats like ARRIRAW HDE, Canon RAW Light, and Canon C80. Also, the new version of Premiere Pro supports some new audio formats like Dolby Atmos, plus the new version of Premiere Pro can play back ARRIRAW at 60% of the original file size, so that's pretty cool. What about the user experience? Well, it's hard to deny that the new version of Premiere Pro looks much nicer. It has a modern interface and rounded edges and corners everywhere. Also, they updated the player controls and the title bar, and overall it just feels more polished. I also like that they've added a few color themes, so you can choose whatever looks best to you. But what about automation and AI? Well, the new version of Premiere Pro takes things to the next level with AI. It can enhance your speech, remove background noises, and transcribe your videos quickly. It can also tag your audio for you, so you don't have to go in manually and tag each one. Plus it has all of the other cool AI features like Firefly and stuff. And this stuff isn't just gimmicks, it actually makes editing faster. AI is definitely here to stay, and Adobe is definitely leading the pack. So what about the audio tools? Well, in terms of effects, both versions of Premiere Pro have pretty much the same effects available. However, more effects are GPU accelerated in the new version, like the crop render, magnify, spherize, and wave warp effects. But even if you don't have a GPU, the new version of Premiere Pro does render things faster. That's just how it is. They've changed the algorithm behind the scenes so that even with a CPU you can get faster renders. But of course, if you have a GPU, it's going to be much faster. As far as audio tools go, the new version of Premiere Pro does have a few upgrades like enhanced speech and the ability to auto-tag your audio. Those two features are really game changers. And then of course, there's the new Lumetri panel, which I mentioned earlier. Speaking of the Lumetri panel, let's talk about color. Well, the new version of Premiere Pro does make things a little bit easier to understand, especially for beginners. They've consolidated a bunch of the tools into one panel and removed some of the buttons from the effects panel. Overall, I think it's a lot easier to navigate. However, I still think that DaVinci Resolve's color tools are a bit better. Finally, let's talk about the stability of the new version of Premiere Pro. I mentioned earlier that it's faster, but is it any more stable? Well, I'm happy to report that in my tests it seems to be a little bit more stable. Of course, I haven't used the new version of Premiere Pro for a year yet, so